In the grand corridors of Buckingham Palace, where secrets whisper through ancient walls and loyalty is tested by truth, one soldier's unwavering courage would shake the very foundations of the British crown. What started as a routine security assignment would become the most dangerous mission of his life, exposing a web of deception that reached the highest levels of royalty. This is the true story of how honor triumphed over hierarchy, and how one man's bravery changed the course of history. The morning mist hung low over the manicured gardens of Buckingham Palace, as Sergeant William Thompson adjusted his ceremonial uniform for what he believed would be another ordinary day of royal duty. At 32, Thompson had served the crown with distinction for over a decade, his military record spotless, and his loyalty unquestioned. The Welsh Guards had been his family since he left his small hometown of Llanfairpwll at 18, seeking purpose and honor in service to his country. Thompson's weathered hand straightened his red tunic as he walked through the palace's service entrance, nodding to familiar faces among the staff. The early morning shift was always quieter, with fewer tourists and dignitaries crowding the public areas. It was during these peaceful hours that Thompson felt most connected to the history surrounding him, imagining the countless soldiers who had walked these same corridors in service to monarchs past. His assignment that Tuesday morning was routine security patrol of the East Wing, where King Charles maintained his private offices and conducted sensitive meetings away from the public eye. Thompson had performed this duty countless times before, but something felt different as he made his way through the marble hallways. Perhaps it was the unusual number of civilian contractors he'd noticed entering the building over the past week, or the hushed conversations that seemed to stop whenever he approached. As Thompson rounded the corner near the king's private study, he nearly collided with a well-dressed man carrying a leather briefcase. The stranger was middle-aged, with sharp features and expensive clothing that marked him as someone important, though Thompson didn't recognize him from any of the official visitor lists he'd memorized. "Pardon me," the man said with a slight accent Thompson couldn't place, his eyes darting nervously around the corridor. "I seem to have lost my way to the morning briefing room." Thompson studied the man carefully. Something about his demeanor set off alarm bells that years of military training had finely tuned. The way he held the briefcase protectively against his chest, the thin layer of perspiration on his forehead despite the cool morning air, and most tellingly, the fact that there were no morning briefings scheduled in this wing according to Thompson's security roster. "Sir, may I see your identification and authorization to be in this area?" Thompson asked politely but firmly, his hand instinctively moving closer to his radio. The stranger's composure faltered slightly. "Of course. One moment." He fumbled through his jacket pockets with his free hand while maintaining his grip on the briefcase. After a moment of searching, he produced a laminated badge that looked official at first glance. Thompson examined the identification carefully. While it bore the correct palace logos and appeared genuine, something nagged at him about the photograph. The image seemed too perfect, too new for someone who claimed to be a regular palace consultant. More importantly, the security clearance code didn't match any of the authorized personnel classifications he'd been briefed on. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'll need to verify this with palace security before you can proceed," Thompson said, reaching for his radio. The man's demeanor changed instantly. "That won't be necessary, Sergeant. I'm running late for a very important meeting with His Majesty's private secretary." "Surely you understand the importance of royal punctuality." The mention of Thompson's rank without introduction raised another red flag. While his stripes were visible on his uniform, most civilians wouldn't automatically recognize the specific rank designation. This suggested the man had either military training or had been briefed on palace security personnel. "Nevertheless, sir, protocol requires verification." Thompson maintained his professional tone while subtly positioning himself between the stranger and the corridor leading to the king's offices. The tension in the hallway was palpable as the two men faced each other. Thompson's military instincts were screaming that something was wrong, but his training also demanded he handle the situation with the diplomacy required within the palace walls. One wrong move could create an international incident, if this man was indeed an authorized visitor whose credentials were simply unfamiliar to Thompson. The stranger glanced at his expensive watch and sighed heavily. "Very well, Sergeant. But I do hope this delay won't reflect poorly on your performance review. Lord Chamberlain Blackwood specifically requested my presence this morning." Thompson's blood ran cold at the mention of Lord Chamberlain Blackwood. The position of Lord Chamberlain had been vacant for 3 months following the previous holder's sudden resignation amid whispers of financial irregularities. Either this man was operating on severely outdated information, or he was testing Thompson's knowledge of current palace operations. "Sir, I believe there may be some confusion," Thompson said carefully. "Lord Chamberlain Blackwood is no longer with the palace. Perhaps you meant to refer to Acting Deputy Chamberlain Morrison." The mistake confirmed Thompson's suspicions, but the stranger recovered quickly. Of course, my apologies. These administrative changes happen so frequently these days. Deputy Morrison, naturally. Thompson activated his radio while maintaining eye contact with the suspicious visitor. Control, this is Thompson in East Wing. I need immediate verification on visitor authorization for... He paused, realizing he hadn't gotten the man's name. Dr. Marcus Henley, the stranger supplied, though Thompson noticed his hand tighten on the briefcase handle. Dr. Marcus Henley, Thompson repeated into his radio, then waited for the response that he already suspected would come back negative. The radio crackled to life after a moment. Thompson, negative on any doctor. Marcus Henley authorized for East Wing access today. All civilian visitors are logged for West Wing tours only. The man calling himself Dr. Henley began backing away slowly, his eyes darting toward the nearest exit. Thompson could see the calculation in his expression, weighing whether to flee or attempt to talk his way out of the situation. Sir, I'm going to need you to remain here while we sort this out, Thompson said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he'd used commanding troops in Afghanistan. Please set down the briefcase and place your hands where I can see them. Instead of complying, Henley turned and ran toward the emergency exit at the end of the corridor. Thompson immediately gave chase, speaking rapidly into his radio to alert palace security and request backup. His military conditioning served him well as he quickly gained ground on the fleeing intruder. The chase led through several corridors, past startled palace staff members who pressed themselves against the walls as the two men rushed by. Henley proved surprisingly agile for his apparent age, vaulting over furniture and taking shortcuts through rooms that suggested some familiarity with the palace layout. Thompson cornered Henley in the palace library, where ancient books and royal documents lined the walls from floor to ceiling. The intruder was breathing heavily, clutching the briefcase like a lifeline as he backed against a bookshelf filled with centuries-old royal correspondence. There's nowhere else to run, Thompson said, his own breathing controlled despite the pursuit. Security teams are sealing all exits. The best thing you can do now is cooperate and explain what you're doing here. Henley's facade finally cracked completely. You have no idea what you're interfering with, Sergeant. This goes far beyond your pay grade or security clearance. Walk away now, and forget you ever saw me. That's not going to happen, Thompson replied firmly. Whatever's in that briefcase, whatever you're planning, it stops here. The standoff in the library lasted only moments before the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. Palace security officers led by Chief Inspector Davies burst through the library doors with weapons drawn. Dr. Henley, or whoever you are, you're under arrest for trespassing in a secure government facility, Davies announced. Place the briefcase on the floor and step away from it slowly. Henley looked around desperately, realizing his situation was hopeless. With visible reluctance, he placed the leather briefcase on an antique reading table and raised his hands in surrender. As Davies and his team secured the prisoner, Thompson approached the briefcase cautiously. The leather was high quality, with brass fittings that gleamed under the library's chandeliers. A complex lock mechanism suggested whatever was inside was extremely valuable or sensitive. Don't open it here, Davies warned. We'll need the bomb squad to examine it first, then process it in a secure facility. Thompson nodded, but his curiosity was burning. Who was this man? And what had he been planning to do with the contents of that briefcase? As they waited for the specialized security team to arrive, Thompson noticed Henley watching him with an expression that seemed almost pitying. You think you've done something heroic today, don't, Sergeant? Henley said quietly as Davies read him his rights. But you've only delayed the inevitable. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually, with or without my assistance. The cryptic words sent a chill down Thompson's spine. As the prisoner was led away and the briefcase was carefully removed for analysis, Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was just the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous. Later that afternoon, Thompson was called to Chief Inspector Davies' office for his initial debrief. The sparse room was dominated by a large desk covered in paperwork and several monitors displaying security camera feeds from around the palace.
Outstanding work today, Sergeant,
Davies began, settling into his chair behind the desk. Your quick thinking and adherence to protocol prevented what could have been a serious security breach. Thompson remained at attention until Davies gestured for him to sit. Thank you, sir. Has the briefcase been examined yet? Davies' expression grew somber. That's actually why I called you here. The contents were unusual. Documents, photographs, and what appears to be audio recording equipment. All related to private royal matters that shouldn't be in civilian hands. Industrial espionage? Thompson asked. Foreign intelligence. We're still investigating, Davies replied carefully. What I can tell you is that this case is being classified at the highest levels. You'll be required to sign additional confidentiality agreements, and I'm afraid the details of what you discovered today must never be discussed with anyone outside this office. Sir, with respect, is there something specific I should be concerned about? Davies leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Thompson, in my 20 years of palace security, I've never seen the Royal Protection Unit move so quickly to contain information. Whatever that man was carrying, it has people at the very top extremely nervous. The weight of Davies' words settled over Thompson like a heavy blanket. He had joined the military to serve his country and protect the crown, but now he found himself wondering what exactly he had stumbled into. The expression on Henley's face haunted him, not the look of a common criminal caught in the act, but something more troubling. The look of a man who believed he was trying to expose something important. As Thompson left Davies' office with a stack of confidentiality documents to sign, he made a decision that would change the course of his life. Instead of simply following orders and forgetting about the incident, he would quietly investigate what had really happened. His loyalty to the crown demanded nothing less than ensuring the safety and integrity of the institution he had sworn to protect. That evening, Thompson sat in his small flat near the barracks, staring at the official reports he was supposed to sign. The language was standard bureaucratic prose, but reading between the lines, he detected an urgency that suggested this incident was far from routine. References to ongoing security reviews and enhanced monitoring protocols painted a picture of an organization preparing for something significant. Thompson's military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct he possessed was telling him that Dr. Marcus Henley, if that was even his real name, had been telling the truth about one thing. This was only the beginning. As he signed the confidentiality agreements with a heavy heart, Thompson began planning his own quiet investigation into what secrets might be hidden within the palace walls he had sworn to protect. The next morning brought a new assignment that seemed routine on the surface but felt anything but ordinary to Thompson's heightened awareness. He was posted to the Royal Archives, a position that typically went to senior guards nearing retirement. Quiet, prestigious, and requiring the highest security clearance. The timing felt too coincidental to be mere bureaucratic rotation. The Royal Archives occupied an entire sublevel of the palace, accessible only through a discreet elevator that required both a keycard and biometric scanning. As Thompson descended into the climate-controlled depths of the building, he couldn't help but wonder if his superiors were rewarding his vigilance with a prestigious assignment or quietly burying him where his curiosity couldn't cause problems. The archives themselves were a marvel of preservation technology and royal history. Endless rows of climate-controlled storage units contained everything from medieval parchments to modern digital servers. The air hummed with the quiet efficiency of preservation equipment, maintaining perfect environmental conditions for documents that told the story of 1,000 years of British monarchy. Thompson's supervisor in the archives was an elderly man named Mr. Pemberton, whose title of senior archivist barely captured his role as guardian of the Crown's most sensitive historical materials. Pemberton had worked in the palace for over 40 years, beginning as a junior clerk and rising through dedication and absolute discretion. The role requires more than just security presence, Pemberton explained as he led Thompson through the maze of storage areas. These documents represent the living memory of the monarchy. Every letter, every photograph, every recording tells part of the story of who we are as a nation. Thompson listened carefully, noting how Pemberton's reverent tone masked something else, perhaps caution, or even concern. As they passed various storage sections, Thompson noticed some areas were marked with additional security classifications he didn't recognize. "What's kept in the restricted sections?" Thompson asked, pointing to a corridor blocked by additional security barriers. Pemberton paused, considering his words carefully. "Recent materials that haven't completed the standard declassification review. Personal correspondence, private meeting recordings, financial documents. Nothing dramatic, but materials that require additional protection until they can be properly cataloged and assessed." The explanation felt rehearsed, but Thompson didn't push further. Instead, he focused on learning his new duties and the complex systems that protected the archives. Over the following days, he began to understand the careful balance between preservation and security that governed everything in the underground facility. It was during his second week in the archives that Thompson made a discovery that changed everything. While conducting a routine security sweep of the restricted areas, he noticed something unusual about one of the storage rooms. The electronic lock showed signs of recent forced entry scratches around the mechanism and subtle damage to the door frame that suggested someone with technical skills had bypassed the security system. Thompson immediately reported the possible break-in to Pemberton, expecting the elderly archivist to share his concern. Instead, Pemberton's reaction was strangely muted. "I'm sure it's nothing serious," Pemberton said, barely glancing at the damaged lock. "These older systems sometimes show wear that can be misinterpreted. I'll have maintenance look at it next week." The dismissive response raised red flags for Thompson. In his military experience, any potential security breach was treated with immediate seriousness. Pemberton's casual attitude suggested either the break-in was already known and authorized, or the archivist was deliberately downplaying its significance. That night, Thompson made another decision that would have far-reaching consequences. Using his legitimate security clearance and access to the archives, he decided to investigate the compromised storage room himself. If there had been a break-in, he needed to understand what might have been taken and whether it posed a threat to royal security. The restricted storage room contained hundreds of files organized by date and classification level. Thompson methodically checked the filing system for any obvious gaps or disturbances. What he found was more subtle than missing documents. Several file folders showed signs of being recently photographed, with slight creases and positioning that suggested they had been removed from their folders and replaced. Thompson carefully examined one of the disturbed files, finding it contained correspondence between King Charles and various government officials regarding recent policy decisions. While the letters themselves seemed routine, their presence in a section marked for eventual public release after standard review period seemed inconsistent with the additional security measures protecting them. As Thompson continued his investigation, a pattern emerged that made his blood run cold. The files that showed signs of unauthorized access all dealt with the same general subject matter: recent decisions by King Charles that had been unpopular with certain political factions, including his positions on climate change initiatives, social welfare programs, and international trade agreements. More disturbing still was the discovery of a hidden camera device. The device was sophisticated enough to suggest government or intelligence agency installation, but its presence in the royal archives without Thompson's knowledge as security chief raised serious questions about who was monitoring royal activities and why.
Thompson faced an impossible choice as he stood in the violated storage room.
His duty as a soldier demanded he report the surveillance device immediately, through proper channels. But his growing suspicions about the motives behind Dr. Howard, Henley's infiltration attempt, combined with the inadequate response to the obvious break-in, suggested that proper channels might not lead to proper answers. The weight of his decision pressed down on him as he realized that his simple act of catching an intruder had led him to discover what appeared to be a systematic effort to monitor and potentially discredit the king himself. For a soldier who had sworn an oath to protect the crown, the implications were staggering and dangerous. Thompson's discovery of the surveillance equipment transformed his understanding of the situation from a simple security breach to something far more sinister. As he stood alone in the compromised archive room, the magnitude of what he was uncovering began to crystallize. This wasn't the work of foreign spies or common criminals. The sophistication of the operation suggested involvement from within the British government or intelligence services themselves. The hidden camera device was a masterpiece of surveillance technology, virtually undetectable, without specific knowledge of where to look. Its position provided a clear view of the most sensitive filing cabinets, suggesting whoever installed it knew exactly what documents they wanted to monitor. Thompson carefully photographed the device with his personal phone, being careful not to disturb its positioning. Over the next several days, Thompson began what he privately called quiet reconnaissance. Using his legitimate access and security duties as cover, he systematically examined other areas of the archives for additional surveillance equipment. What he discovered painted a picture of comprehensive monitoring that had likely been ongoing for months, possibly years. Every major storage area containing contemporary royal correspondence had been compromised. The devices varied in type and sophistication, suggesting they had been installed over time by different teams or agencies. Some were simple listening devices, while others were capable of high-resolution photography and real-time data transmission. The pattern indicated a coordinated effort by multiple parties to monitor royal activities and communications. Thompson's investigation took on new urgency when he discovered that several files had been not just photographed, but actually replaced with carefully crafted forgeries. The substituted documents contained subtle alterations that changed their meaning significantly. Letters expressing the king's support for certain policies had been altered to suggest opposition, while private communications had been modified to create apparent inconsistencies with public positions. The sophistication of the forgeries was stunning. Only Thompson's military training and document authentication allowed him to detect the alterations. The paper, ink, and even writing analysis would likely pass casual inspection, suggesting the involvement of professional intelligence operatives with access to significant resources. As Thompson delved deeper into the conspiracy, he realized the scope extended far beyond simple surveillance. Someone was systematically building a case against King Charles, creating a narrative of inconsistency and poor judgment that could be used to undermine his authority or force his abdication. The forged documents would provide seemingly authentic evidence of royal misconduct if they were ever made public. The weight of this discovery forced Thompson to confront a terrible truth. He was witnessing a coup attempt against the British monarchy, carried out not by foreign enemies, but by domestic forces using the tools of modern intelligence warfare. The implications for constitutional democracy and the stability of the British government were staggering. Thompson knew he needed help, but determining who to trust had become exponentially more difficult. The presence of professional surveillance equipment suggested involvement from within the security services themselves. Standard reporting channels might lead directly to the people orchestrating the conspiracy. He needed to find someone with both the authority to act and the integrity to resist corruption. After careful consideration, Thompson decided to approach Lord Admiral Sir James Wellington, a decorated naval officer who served as one of King Charles's private advisors on security matters. Wellington had a reputation for absolute integrity and had served the crown for over 30 years without a hint of scandal. More importantly, his position outside the normal intelligence hierarchy might make him a safer contact. Arranging a private meeting with Lord Admiral Wellington required careful planning. Thompson couldn't use normal palace communication channels without risking exposure to whoever was monitoring royal activities. Instead, he used his position in the archives to request a consultation on naval historical documents. A legitimate reason for the meeting that wouldn't arouse suspicion. The meeting took place in Wellington's private study, a room lined with nautical charts and maritime artifacts that reflected his distinguished naval career. Thompson had prepared carefully for the conversation, bringing copies of the evidence he had gathered while leaving the originals secured in a location known only to himself. "Sir James, what I'm about to show you represents the most serious threat to the crown I've ever encountered," Thompson began, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "I believe there is an active conspiracy to undermine His Majesty through forged documents and systematic surveillance." Wellington listened intently as Thompson laid out his discoveries, examining the photographs of surveillance devices and the evidence of document forgeries. The Lord Admiral's expression grew increasingly grave as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. "This is extraordinary, Thompson," Wellington said finally. "If what you're showing me is accurate, we're dealing with treason at the highest levels. But we must be absolutely certain of our facts before taking any action." Wellington's cautious approach reflected the delicate nature of the situation. Accusations of this magnitude against members of the government or intelligence services would create a constitutional crisis if they proved to be unfounded. However, failing to act on credible evidence of treason would be equally catastrophic. "What would you need to verify this information, sir?" Thompson asked. "We need to identify who has access to install this surveillance equipment," Wellington replied. "The level of sophistication suggests military or intelligence training, and the access required points to someone with legitimate credentials. We also need to determine the scope of the document alterations and whether any forged materials have already been distributed outside the palace." Thompson had anticipated these questions. "Sir, I've been mapping the surveillance network and have identified patterns that might help us narrow down the perpetrators. Additionally, I believe Dr. Marcus Henley, the man I apprehended last week, may have been attempting to gather evidence of the same conspiracy." This possibility had been growing in Thompson's mind since his first night reviewing the incident. Henley's sophisticated knowledge of palace operations, his expensive equipment, and his seeming confidence that he was doing something important all suggested he might have been investigating rather than participating in the conspiracy. Wellington considered this carefully. If that's true, then Henley might be an ally rather than a threat. However, he's currently being held in a secure facility, and gaining access to him would require careful planning. The two men spent the next hour developing a strategy that would allow them to gather additional evidence while avoiding detection by the conspirators. Wellington's naval intelligence background proved invaluable in planning covert operations within the hostile environment the palace had apparently become. Their plan involved 3 phases. First, confirming the extent of the surveillance network and identifying potential suspects. Second, securing authentic copies of the altered documents to establish the pattern of forgery. And third, determining whether any forged materials had been distributed to media or political figures outside the palace. Thompson's role in the investigation became more complex and dangerous as he began actively seeking evidence while maintaining his normal duties. Every interaction with palace staff and security personnel now carried the risk of exposure if he encountered one of the conspirators. The paranoia was exhausting, but the stakes were too high for anything less than extreme caution. The first breakthrough came when Thompson discovered a pattern in the surveillance device installations that pointed to a specific security contractor who had performed routine maintenance on archive systems over the past 18 months. Cross-referencing this information with staff access logs revealed that the devices had been installed during scheduled maintenance windows when the archives were officially closed to all personnel except the contractors. The security company Meridian Technical Solutions appeared legitimate on the surface but had been formed only 2 years earlier with minimal corporate history. Its ownership structure was obscured through multiple shell companies, a red flag that suggested intelligence agency backing or other covert funding sources. Thompson's investigation of Meridian Technical Solutions led him into the shadowy world of private intelligence contractors, companies that provided services to government agencies while maintaining plausible deniability. These organizations operated in the gray area between legitimate business and covert operations, making them ideal tools for activities that official agencies couldn't be directly linked to. Further research revealed that Meridian had contracts with several government departments, including some that worked closely with the Cabinet Office and the Prime Minister's staff. The connection suggested that the conspiracy against King Charles might originate from the highest levels of the elected government, possibly involving officials who saw the king's political positions as obstacles to their agenda. This discovery forced Thompson to confront the possibility that he was witnessing not just a criminal conspiracy, but a constitutional crisis involving fundamental conflicts between the monarchy and elected government. The implications went far beyond palace security to the very foundations of British democracy and the balance of power between institutions. As Thompson shared his findings with Lord Admiral Wellington, both men realized they were dealing with something unprecedented in modern British history. The systematic effort to undermine the king through forged evidence suggested a level of institutional corruption that threatened the entire governmental system. "We're approaching a point where we must decide whether to continue this investigation alone or bring in outside help," Wellington told Thompson during one of their clandestine meetings. "The evidence is becoming too significant for us to handle through informal channels." Thompson understood the dilemma. Expanding their investigation would provide additional resources and expertise, but it would also increase the risk of exposure to the conspirators. Every new person brought into their confidence represented a potential security breach that could result in their evidence being destroyed and their own safety being compromised. The decision was made for them when Thompson discovered that his own activities had not gone unnoticed. During a routine security sweep of his quarters, he found evidence that his personal belongings had been searched by someone with professional intelligence training. The search had been conducted with such skill that Thompson almost missed it, but years of military service had taught him to notice subtle disturbances in his environment. The discovery that he was now under surveillance added urgency to their investigation. If the conspirators suspected Thompson's activities, they might accelerate their timeline or take steps to eliminate the evidence he had gathered. Worse still, they might take direct action against Thompson himself to prevent exposure of their operation. Wellington responded to this development by activating his own network of trusted contacts within the military and intelligence communities. These were officers and officials who had served with distinction for decades and whose loyalty to the crown was unquestioned. However, even these communications had to be conducted with extreme caution to avoid interception by the very agencies they were investigating. The expansion of their investigation team brought both opportunities and risks. Additional manpower allowed them to accelerate their evidence gathering and begin building comprehensive profiles of the suspected conspirators. However, each new person involved in the investigation represented another potential target for the people they were investigating. Thompson found himself living in a state of constant vigilance, varying his routines and maintaining careful awareness of his surroundings. His military training served him well, but the psychological stress of operating under constant threat while maintaining his normal duties was taking its toll. Sleep became elusive, and every unusual sound or unexpected visitor triggered heightened alertness. The investigation took a dramatic turn when one of Wellington's contacts in the intelligence community provided information that confirmed their worst fears. According to this source, there was indeed an active operation targeting King Charles, but it was being conducted with the knowledge and approval of senior government officials who believed the king's political positions were damaging British interests. The operation, codenamed Constitutional Reset, was apparently designed to force King Charles to abdicate in favor of Prince William, who was perceived as more politically neutral and less likely to interfere with government policy. The forged documents and surveillance network were part of a comprehensive plan to create a crisis of confidence in the king's judgment and fitness to rule. Learning the scope and official backing of the conspiracy was both validating and terrifying for Thompson. On one hand, it confirmed that his suspicions were correct and that he had been right to pursue the investigation. On the other hand, it revealed that he was now opposing not just individual conspirators, but an operation with significant government backing and resources. The knowledge that he was fighting against elements of his own government created a profound moral crisis for Thompson. As a soldier, he had sworn an oath to serve the crown and protect the nation. But those two loyalties now seemed to be in conflict. The people implementing constitutional reset undoubtedly believed they were acting in Britain's best interests, even as they violated their oaths and subverted democratic institutions. Wellington shared Thompson's moral struggle, but was resolute about their course of action. "The Crown is not just a person, Thompson," he explained. "It's an institution that represents the continuity and stability of our democracy. If we allow this precedent to stand, we'll have established that secret cabals can remove monarchs at will. That path leads to the destruction of constitutional monarchy itself." The philosophical implications of their fight took on practical urgency when they learned that the conspirators were preparing to move to the next phase of their operation. According to their intelligence source, forged documents were being prepared for release to selected media outlets, timed to coincide with a manufactured crisis that would make King Charles appear unfit to rule. Thompson and Wellington realized they had limited time to expose the conspiracy before it succeeded in forcing the king's abdication. However, their evidence, while substantial, was still circumstantial. They needed something more definitive to convince authorities to act against such high-level conspirators. The answer came from an unexpected source when Dr. Marcus Henley managed to send a message through his legal counsel indicating he had information vital to national security and was willing to share it with the proper authorities. The timing suggested that Henley had somehow learned of their investigation, possibly through contacts in the intelligence community who were monitoring the situation. Arranging access to Henley required delicate negotiations with security officials who were potentially part of the conspiracy Thompson was investigating. Wellington used his considerable influence and reputation to arrange a meeting that would appear to be routine legal consultation while actually providing an opportunity for intelligence gathering. The meeting with Henley took place in a secure interview room under the pretense of legal consultation regarding his trespassing charges. Thompson was present as a security witness, a legitimate role that allowed him to participate in the conversation without arousing suspicion. Henley's first words confirmed Thompson's growing suspicions about his true purpose in the palace. "I wasn't there to steal anything, Sergeant Thompson. I was there to prevent something being stolen. Specifically, the crown itself." Over the next hour, Henley revealed that he was an investigative journalist who had been tracking the constitutional reset operation for months. His attempt to access the palace archives had been part of an effort to gather evidence of the document forgeries and surveillance network. His professional quality equipment and knowledge of palace operations came from contacts within the intelligence community who opposed the operation. "I have copies of communications between the conspirators, financial records showing payments to Meridian Technical Solutions, and most importantly, recordings of meetings where the operation was planned and approved," Henley told them. "But I need protection and official support to make this information public safely." The revelation that Henley was an ally rather than a threat transformed the investigation. His independent evidence corroborated Thompson's discoveries and provided additional details about the scope and leadership of the conspiracy. More importantly, his journalistic credentials and existing relationships with media outlets offered a path to public exposure of the plot. However, Henley's cooperation came with a warning that increased the urgency of their situation. "They know I have this information," he told them. "My arrest bought you some time, but they're planning to move forward with or without recovering what I gathered. The fabricated crisis is scheduled for next week." Thompson left the meeting with Henley feeling both relieved and terrified. They now had the evidence and allies needed to expose the conspiracy, but they also knew they had less than a week to prevent a constitutional crisis that could destroy the monarchy and British democracy as they knew it. The race against time had begun, and the stakes could not have been higher. With less than a week to prevent the fabricated crisis that would destroy King Charles's reign, Thompson and his growing network of allies moved into the most dangerous phase of their operation. The evidence they had gathered was compelling, but exposing a conspiracy involving senior government officials required more than just proof. It demanded a strategy that would protect both the monarchy and the democratic institutions being manipulated by the conspirators. Lord Admiral Wellington took the lead in developing their exposure strategy, drawing on his decades of experience in naval intelligence and government relations. The plan was complex and risky, requiring precise timing and the cooperation of multiple agencies and media outlets. One mistake could result in their evidence being suppressed and their own careers or lives being destroyed. The first step was securing the evidence itself. Thompson had been carefully documenting everything he discovered, but keeping those records safe from the conspirators required sophisticated operational security. Wellington arranged for the evidence to be copied and distributed to multiple secure locations, including trusted allies in the military, independent legal counsel, and foreign intelligence services that had relationships with the Crown. Simultaneously, they began building a coalition of support within the establishment. Wellington's contacts in the House of Lords, the military high command, and the intelligence community were quietly briefed on the situation. These conversations required extraordinary discretion, as any of these individuals could potentially be part of the conspiracy, or could inadvertently alert the conspirators to their investigation. Thompson found himself at the center of a complex web of communications and evidence gathering that felt more like a military campaign than a security investigation. His role evolved from simple palace guard to key witness and intelligence asset in what was becoming the most significant constitutional crisis in modern British history. The breakthrough they needed came when one of Wellington's contacts in MI6 provided information that confirmed the identity of the operation's leadership. The conspiracy was being coordinated by Deputy Prime Minister Harold Ashford, Chancellor Patricia Morrison, and Cabinet Secretary Sir Richard Blackthorne, three of the most powerful people in the British government. This revelation was both validating and terrifying. It confirmed that their suspicions about high-level government involvement were correct, but it also revealed that they were opposing individuals with virtually unlimited resources and legal authority. Taking on such powerful adversaries would require evidence so overwhelming and public support so strong that suppression would be impossible. Dr. Marcus Hemley became crucial to their strategy for public exposure. As an experienced investigative journalist, he understood how to present complex evidence in ways that both the media and the public could understand. More importantly, his existing relationships with major newspapers and television networks provided channels for information distribution that would be difficult for the government to control. Working with Henley, Thompson began preparing comprehensive documentation of the conspiracy that could be released simultaneously to multiple media outlets. The package included photographs of surveillance equipment, analysis of forged documents, financial records linking government officials to Meridian Technical Solutions, and recorded communications discussing the operation. The media strategy was designed to make suppression impossible. By releasing information to newspapers, television networks, and online platforms simultaneously, they ensured that no single outlet could be pressured or threatened into silence. The coordination required precise timing and secure communications that wouldn't alert the conspirators to the impending exposure. As they finalized their preparations, Thompson received intelligence that the conspirators were accelerating their timeline. The fabricated crisis that would justify forcing King Charles's abdication was being moved up by several days, possibly in response to signs that their operation was being investigated. The manufactured crisis was to center around a forged letter, allegedly written by the king, expressing support for a controversial political position that would be deeply unpopular with both Parliament and the public. The letter would be leaked to the press at the same time as other forged documents suggesting a pattern of inappropriate political interference by the monarchy. Thompson's knowledge of the planned fabrication allowed them to prepare counter-evidence that would immediately expose the forgeries. However, preventing the crisis altogether required them to act before the forged materials could be released to the media. This meant accelerating their own timeline and accepting additional risks. The final phase of their operation began when Wellington arranged a private meeting with King Charles himself. The king needed to be informed of the conspiracy against him and prepared for the public revelation that was about to unfold. This meeting represented the highest stakes of the entire investigation, as the king's reaction would determine how the constitutional crisis would be resolved. Thompson accompanied Wellington to the private audience, his role as the primary investigator making his testimony crucial to convincing the king of the conspiracy's reality. The meeting took place in the king's private study, the same area where Thompson had first encountered the archives that led him to uncover the plot. King Charles listened to their presentation with the composure befitting his position, but Thompson could see the impact of their revelations in the monarch's expression. Learning that senior members of his own government were actively working to force his abdication was clearly a devastating blow to someone who had devoted his life to service and constitutional duty. "The evidence you've presented is extraordinary," the king said after reviewing their documentation. "If what you're telling me is accurate, we're facing not just a personal attack on the crown, but a fundamental assault on constitutional democracy itself." Wellington outlined their strategy for public exposure, emphasizing the need for the king's cooperation in presenting the evidence in ways that would strengthen rather than weaken democratic institutions. The goal was not just to defeat the immediate conspiracy, but to reform the systems that had allowed such a plot to develop. The king's response demonstrated the wisdom that had marked his decades of public service. "We must proceed in a way that strengthens public confidence in our institutions rather than undermining them. The people must understand that this conspiracy was the work of individuals, not a failure of our democratic system itself." With the king's authorization, Thompson and his allies moved to the final phase of their operation.
The evidence package was distributed to media outlets with instructions to publish simultaneously at a predetermined time. Legal authorities were briefed and prepared to take action against the conspirators. Military and security personnel loyal to the Crown were alerted to potential retaliation from the conspiracy's supporters.
The night before the public revelation, Thompson barely slept. The weight of responsibility for exposing one of the most significant political conspiracies in British history was overwhelming. Everything he had done since that first encounter with Dr. Henley in the palace corridor had led to this moment, and the consequences of their actions would reshape British politics for generations. The public revelation began at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, with simultaneous publications in The Times, The Guardian, and The Telegraph, followed by broadcasts on BBC and ITV.
The story dominated every major news outlet within hours as the evidence of the conspiracy was laid out in unprecedented detail. The initial public reaction was shock and outrage at the scope of the plot against the monarchy.
The forged documents, surveillance equipment, and recorded communications provided undeniable proof that senior government officials had attempted to subvert democratic institutions for political gain. The story had every element needed for maximum impact: betrayal, deception, constitutional crisis, and a brave soldier who risked everything to protect the crown. Deputy Prime Minister Ashford, Chancellor Morrison, and Cabinet Secretary Blackthorne attempted to deny the allegations, but the evidence was too comprehensive to dismiss. Within 24 hours, all three had resigned their positions and were facing criminal charges for treason and conspiracy against the crown. The broader implications of the conspiracy's exposure created a political earthquake that reshaped British government. The Prime Minister, though apparently not directly involved in the plot, was forced to resign due to his failure to detect or prevent the conspiracy within his own administration. Parliament launched comprehensive investigations into intelligence agencies and security contractors to prevent similar plots in the future. Thompson found himself transformed from anonymous palace guard to national hero, though he remained uncomfortable with the attention his military training had emphasized service over recognition, and he was more concerned with ensuring that the reforms needed to prevent future conspiracies were properly implemented. The investigation's aftermath revealed the full scope of how close Britain had come to a constitutional catastrophe. If the conspiracy had succeeded, it would have established the precedent that unelected officials could manipulate public opinion and force monarchs to abdicate whenever their political positions became inconvenient.
The implications for democracy and constitutional stability would have been catastrophic. Dr. Biden,
Marcus Henley received recognition for his investigative journalism, though he also faced criticism from some quarters for his unorthodox methods of gathering evidence. His willingness to risk imprisonment to expose the conspiracy ultimately vindicated his approach, and his work became a model for investigative reporting in the digital age.
Lord Admiral Wellington was appointed to head a comprehensive review of palace security and intelligence oversight, ensuring that the reforms needed to prevent similar conspiracies would be properly implemented. His combination of military experience and unquestioned loyalty to the crown made him the ideal person to rebuild trust in the institutions that had been compromised.
King Charles emerged from the crisis with his reputation not only intact but enhanced by his dignified response to the attack on his authority. His insistence on strengthening democratic institutions rather than seeking personal revenge demonstrated the kind of leadership that the monarchy at its best could provide. Thompson's promotion to Chief of Palace Security was announced 3 months after the conspiracy's exposure. His new role gave him the authority and resources needed to implement the security reforms that would protect the crown from future threats. The irony that his career was advanced by the very conspiracy that had attempted to destroy the monarchy was not lost on him.
the broader impact of the constitutional reset conspiracy exposure extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. Parliament passed comprehensive legislation strengthening oversight of intelligence agencies and private security contractors.
New safeguards were implemented to prevent the manipulation of official documents and communications. Most importantly, the public's understanding of how democratic institutions could be subverted was significantly enhanced. Thompson often reflected on the chain of events that had begun with his simple decision to verify the credentials of a suspicious visitor to the palace. His military training had emphasized the importance of following procedures and trusting instincts, but he could never have anticipated that those basic principles would lead him to uncover and defeat one of the most sophisticated political conspiracies in British history. The experience taught Thompson important lessons about the fragility of democratic institutions and the constant vigilance required to protect them. Conspiracies against democracy rarely announced themselves with dramatic gestures. They worked through bureaucratic manipulation, forged documents, and the gradual erosion of truth. Defending democracy required the same attention to detail and adherence to principle that Thompson had learned in military service. Years later, as Thompson established new security protocols and training programs for palace personnel, he made sure that every guard understood their role not just as protectors of individuals, but as guardians of institutions that embodied centuries of democratic development.
The crown they protected was not just a person or a family, but a symbol of constitutional continuity that provided stability in an increasingly complex world. The story of how a brave soldier exposed the palace's hidden truth became part of the official history of the monarchy, though many of the operational details remained classified to protect ongoing security measures.
Thompson's name was engraved on a memorial to public servants who had gone beyond the call of duty to protect democratic institutions, ensuring that future generations would remember the importance of individual courage in defending collective freedom. The conspiracy's defeat also led to King Charles' most significant promotion of Thompson, not to a higher military rank, but to a position of trust and responsibility that recognized his unique contribution to protecting the crown and the Constitution.
As the new director of constitutional security, Thompson became responsible for coordinating between military, intelligence, and civilian agencies to prevent future threats to democratic institutions. In his new role, Thompson established protocols that would ensure no similar conspiracy could develop without detection. These included regular security audits, enhanced background screening for personnel with access to sensitive materials, and improved communication between agencies responsible for protecting constitutional institutions. The success of Thompson's investigation and the subsequent reforms provided a model for other democracies facing similar threats.
Intelligence agencies around the world studied the constitutional reset case to understand how domestic conspiracies could be detected and defeated before they succeeded in undermining legitimate government. Thompson's story ultimately became more than just an account of one soldier's courage. It became a testament to the importance of institutional loyalty, personal integrity, and the willingness of individuals to sacrifice personal safety for the greater good. In an age when democratic institutions faced increasing pressure from both foreign adversaries and domestic extremists, Thompson's example provided hope that dedicated public servants could still make a difference.
The palace that Thompson now helped protect was fundamentally different from the one he had first entered as a young guardsman. Security measures were more sophisticated, personnel screening was more thorough, and awareness of potential threats was significantly enhanced. But the essential mission remained the same: protecting the institutions that allowed democracy to function and freedom to flourish. As Thompson walked the corridors where his investigation had begun, he was reminded daily of how close Britain had come to losing something precious and irreplaceable.
The conspiracy had failed, the crown had survived, and democracy had been strengthened by the experience. But the vigilance required to maintain these achievements would never end, and Thompson was proud to dedicate his career to ensuring that future generations would inherit the same freedoms he had fought to protect.